So you were literally made for this, Chloe. It's good to have you. Do you have a pandemic playbook?
We certainly do, Kelly. Shutting down businesses was difficult. Reactivating them is going to be harder. But of course, what is important here is that there are things that businesses can do in order to prepare for it. And they've had a little bit of a quiet shutdown period in order to start preparing for them.
So what does that look like? Are we talking about tests? Are we talking about surveillance? Are we talking about having your blood drawn, at your place of work? Are infrared scanners of, for your body heat, fever checks? I even read that Volkswagen in Europe, as it starts to reopen, will be testing its workers' blood oxygen levels.
I think we're going to be seeing a lot of these measures. It's going to vary based on what that particular business is able to take on. Large businesses are obviously going to be able to put a lot more in place than smaller businesses or franchise locations. But what we're going to see is that overall, customers are going to be demanding not just assumptions of safety, but visible steps and measures that companies are taking on behalf of their employees, on behalf of their customers, on behalf of the general public to ensure their safety. And so that could be things like temperature checks at doors. It's obviously going to include things like continuing with the social distancing. Even in sectors where we're not used to seeing it, we're going to have to see personal protective equipment on all employees, probably requirements that customers, like, for example, when they walk into stores, are also wearing things like masks. We're going to have to see reductions in person-to-person contact, even in businesses that really thrive on something like that.
Right.
So that's going to be really hard to do in, say, like a hair salon. But in restaurants, they can start to put up, plexiglass barriers. They can use disposable cutlery, for example. There are measures that they can take.
Yeah.
So we'll start to see them sort of experiment with these things as they go. But hopefully those businesses will have put in place some planning during this downtime that they've had.
It's going to be a bull market for plexiglass, that's for sure, and a bear market for open floor plans, which doesn't sadden me. But for retail, which is an industry that's going to be really affected by this, and it's going to be really difficult to reimagine that. What does retail look like in the post-COVID world? And by the way, how much are companies going to have to spend at a time that their budgets are squeezed to reimagine all of this stuff?
Well, Kelly, certainly there are going to be no testers on the floor, I should hope. Sometimes the obvious things can't escape people. So it's really important that even if they're used to putting out samples, like at a place like Sephora, right?
Ulta, yeah.
Now,
it's like their business, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So they're not going to be able to do that. They're not going to be able to offer that kind of service to people unless they do individually packaged things, for example. So every business is going to have to think about that sort of thing. With clothing or other types of things where they can distance more, it'll be a little simpler. And what they should all be doing is paying attention to those essential businesses that have had to figure this out in real time, like grocery stores, and figuring out what they've been doing and learning as they go. Because, for example, you can bet that if a grocery store chain was behind others in terms of mandating that their employees wear that personal protective equipment, there have been posts on message boards on social media saying, hey, they're not being responsible.
Right.
Consumers expect that. And then also the regulators are going to have to be clear about what they expect in terms of public health, but also in terms of privacy, as you mentioned very importantly in the previous segment.
Yeah, and we're only focusing on the physical workspace, the work schedules around whether you have childcare for your kids or if they're in school or not. It's going to be a complex and like you said, I think you put it best right at the beginning. As hard as it was to shut down, it will be harder to reopen. Chloe, we'll leave it there, but we appreciate it. Thanks for joining me today. Chloe Demrovsky is the CEO of the